Part 29. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 281. The Allied base was on fire, and the main force was divided into almost half, all intent on annihilating Wang Ling's squad. Little did they know that this was something Wang Ling had already planned. This time, Wang Ling led his team to launch a surprise attack, which prevented even the Allied reinforcements from reaching them. Although its purpose is to level this Allied base, the prerequisite is to minimize our own casualties. Although I am very confident in the current Wolf team, this Allied base number 18 is not a freeloader. After all, it comes from victory in other battlefields. The firepower of the elite soldiers will not be worse than them. If they are all gathered together, in a head-to-head confrontation, even if the Wolf team can win, it will still have to pay a heavy price, which is not what Wang Ling wants to see. That's why Wang Ling temporarily divided up such a small team. Compared with the large army, the scale is much smaller, but although the Sparrow is small, it has all the internal organs. In addition, Wang Ling and the elite Apocalypse tanks are holding the battle. If the Allied forces had not invested a large amount of troops, there is really nothing they can do. But if a large number of troops are deployed to encircle and suppress them, the defensive power on the main road will be weakened, just like the current scene. Brothers, the captain's side has already contained a large number of enemy troops. Don't lose control of our side. Come on and beat the hell out of us. Roar! Roar! After Sun De received the order, he shouted, and the large army, which had been impatient for a long time, immediately roared several times. Then, under the leadership of Sun De, the entire army rushed towards the Allied guards in a mighty manner. What stood in the front was the army of Apocalypse tanks and Rhino tanks, followed by a group of mobilization troops behind them, supported by anti-aircraft crawlers. They are indeed the soldiers brought out by Wang Ling. They are the same as Wang Ling. The arrangement of these soldiers is so cunning and stingy. As for the Allied forces, originally because Wang Ling's detachment was strong and furious, they mobilized a large force on the main road to encircle and suppress them. However, they were shocked when they saw that the large coalition forces had seized the opportunity and wanted to attack. He quickly issued an impromptu order to stop the troops who planned to encircle and suppress Wang Ling's team, and wanted to return reinforcements as soon as possible. However, Wang Ling was not happy anymore. He took the initiative and chased the approaching tanks from behind. However, his attack method had a large range and a long range. The fastest multifunctional infantry vehicles were killed by Wang Ling before they had time to run away. Ling was eliminated early. Next came the Grizzly tanks, and in an instant 7 of them were enveloped and powered on. Just when they turned around, they were beaten. The 7 Grizzly tanks were not happy. They turned around again and wanted to take revenge, but the Apocalypse tanks had already charged up and started shelling midway. The 7 Grizzly tanks were I was so frustrated that I was beaten to pieces. But those Allied soldiers were better, far out of Wang Ling's range, and Wang Ling was beyond his reach for a while. However, Wang Ling was not worried. You can run away from the monk, but you can't run away from the temple. He immediately changed his target and rushed towards one of the few light prism towers in the Allied base in the distance. Wang Ling's electromagnetic attack is extremely disruptive. Soldiers and tanks will be slowed down when bombarded. The light prism tower cannot gather light energy to emit, which is equivalent to becoming a decoration and a target. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the Apocalypse tank and 20 elite mobilization soldiers also rushed over, opened fire together, and quickly dismantled the light prism tower. After destroying a light prism tower, Wang Ling was still not satisfied. He moved slightly and began to bombard the Allied tank factory from a distance. Apocalypse and the mobilization troops also rushed over in cooperation, as if they were about to push them across. The posture of the base. This made the Allied base commander extremely anxious. The Allied soldiers and more than a dozen tanks that had originally arrived and been transferred back received orders again and turned around once again to encircle and suppress Wang Ling's team. "Brothers, hit me." However, the large force of the Wolf Squad also rushed to the main intersection, using Apocalypse tanks and Rhino tanks to clear the way. Many conscripts and anti-aircraft crawlers opened fire at the same time. The Allied guards stationed at the main intersection were like cutting wheat. Falling. After the surprise attack, the Wolf team and additional teams were added together, and the number was not too much. It was far less than the number of guards at the Allied base. However, the Wolf Squad itself is extremely powerful in combat, and the supplementary team is even more elite. In addition, Sun Dehu learned from Wang Ling's tricky arrangements. The battle has just begun, and the allies are quickly weakened, and the defense line is loosened. "Stand up!" The commander of the Allied base was furious, and the large guard troops who were dispatched were even more miserable. This team has already begun to bombard the base buildings. If they don't encircle and suppress the base will be in danger. But if they don't defend the main intersection, with the madness of the Wolf team, they may break through the defense line soon. This is neither progress nor retreat, it is simply a dilemma. Boom! While they were hesitating, Wang Ling's team had successfully bombed the tank factory and opened fire on the Allied ore refinery. These two places are in critical condition, and the Allied base is already in trouble. And those guards who had hesitated for a while finally made up their minds to annihilate the team members first. The large forces are still guarding the intersection by storm. No matter how strong the firepower is, it will take some time to get results. But if this small team doesn't care, it will probably turn the world upside down. However, in fact, even if they wanted to, it would be difficult for them to manage it. Wasn't Wang Ling's crazy attack on the Allied base buildings just to hold them back? Seeing this group of guards running toward them, they immediately gave up on the ore refinery that could be blown up at any time, and quickly deployed their positions to resist. This group of guards is quite large in number. There are more than 150 Allied soldiers, plus the remaining 10 or so Grizzly tanks, placed on other battlefields, which is enough to destroy a small base. But here, it's just something that can only be seen. Wang Ling still uses the same old routine, emitting electromagnetic current interference from a distance, consuming and killing Allied guards from a distance. When they get close, Apocalypse tanks and mobilization troops, and even air defense, the tracked vehicles were all on fire. This time, there were half as many enemies as in the last counter-encirclement and suppression campaign. Even with the elite Apocalypse tanks in charge, the team could not resist them all at once. Casualties finally appeared in the fighting. 2 anti-aircraft crawlers were destroyed. 6 mobilization soldiers were killed in the battle, and even 1 Tiankai tank was destroyed, which made Wang Ling stare. Although this kind of casualties were negligible compared to those at the Allied base, in the eyes of a miser like Wang Ling, it made him very distressed and annoyed. Boom boom boom. Although there were already casualties, fortunately, the guards were successfully held back. The large troops at the intersection also seized the time to sweep through, and finally completely tore through the defense line shortly after. More than a dozen anti-aircraft crawler vehicles led the team, and the large troops did not attack. Instead, the buildings of the Allied base moved towards the dragged guards. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 282. Speaking of which, this group of Allied guards is really frustrating. Previously, the Wolf Squad and Wang Ling Squad were playing tricks on each other. They were in a dilemma, unable to take both left and right sides into account. Even the commander was in chaos. Finally, I made up my mind to go and annihilate Wang Ling's squad. If I still had enough time, I might be able to rush to the main road to reinforce them. However, they underestimated the tenacity of this small team. The team was led by Wang Ling and the elite Apocalypse tanks, supplemented by mobilization troops and elite anti-aircraft crawlers. They were stunned and dragged them to death. All the Grizzly tanks were destroyed. After the explosion, even the number of soldiers was quickly wiped out by half. It was only because of the sacrifice of those comrades who sacrificed their lives that they managed to cause some trouble to this small team. Of course, if they were told about the some troubles in their eyes, Wang Ling would feel distressed, and they wouldn't know how much they would be crying. However, this is not the main thing. Wang Ling's squad held them back. The main road was not well guarded, but the Wolf squad's large force quickly broke through the defense line. Moreover, these damn guys were still running in their direction. They came to kill him, and the remaining guards were all desperate. It's so difficult to deal with a small team. Now, the coalition forces are coming. Attacked from both inside and outside, they can't fly out even if they have wings. What kind of gunpowder did this group of coalition forces have? There was such a lunatic captain, leading a group of lunatics, and they attacked before they even had a foothold. Of course, complaints are complaints. There is no such thing as a soldier surrendering alone on the red alert battlefield. All the remaining Allied guards are firing with all their might. Looking at this posture, it is obvious that they have to hold on to their backs even before they die. However, the firepower of the Wolf squad and the squad's internal and external attacks far exceeded them. In the end, out of dozens of Allied soldiers, they only killed more than a dozen conscripts, 4 anti-aircraft tracked vehicles, 3 Rhino tanks and 1 Apocalypse tank. Were all annihilated. In Red Alert, what does the Allied base defense rely on? It's easy to say. First, there are defensive buildings, such as light prism towers, machine gun bunkers, and some forces also have giant cannons. For air defense, they use anti-aircraft missiles. All the troops dispatched by the Wolf team are ground troops. Let's ignore the anti-aircraft missiles for the time being. The second one is the guard troops in the base. They have many types and a large number of bases. If used properly, the defensive effect will not even be worse than that of defensive buildings. But now, the 18th Allied base itself is in the initial stage of reconstruction. All kinds of defensive buildings are already incomplete. 2 more light prism towers were pushed away in the previous battle, and now only 2 light prism towers are left. The towers and 3 machine gun bunkers were unable to stop the wolf-like army of the Wolf squad. As for the guarding troops, it is even more miserable. Up to now, they have been almost completely wiped out. Only a few defeated soldiers are left, huddled deep in the base, unable to make a difference. But the reinforcements from the nearby Allied base are still halfway there, and it will take more than an hour to arrive at the fastest. At this time, how can this Allied base number 18 stop the Wolf team? Being destroyed is already a certainty. Since the decisive battle began, the coalition forces and the Allied forces have been engaged in a tug-of-war. Although they both want to truly destroy each other, it is indeed difficult to do so. If the number 18 Allied forces base is destroyed, it will be the first base to be destroyed on the decisive battlefield. Although victory or defeat is a common thing for soldiers, not to mention that there are many Allied bases on the battlefield of the decisive battle, and destroying one of them will not hurt them, but this is a naked slap in the face. The first base to be destroyed was in the Allied lineup. This made many Allied bases on the battlefield become popular. Therefore, the commanders of the 5 bases near Allied base number 18 took action. With a wave of his hand, he let out a roar, and a large number of troops under his command temporarily assembled, drove out of the base in groups, and headed straight for the 18th Allied base. Among them, the Air Force was the fastest. A total of 20 fighter jets flew out, including 4 Black Hawk fighter jets. This lineup was enough to forcibly kill a coalition command post. Behind them, rocket pilots also flew in groups. Although the speed was not as fast as that of fighter jets, it was not much slower. The ground troops were much slower, but their numbers were very large. There were groups of infantry, tanks, and vehicles, so densely packed that they were hard to count for a while. It was as if they were determined to destroy the Wolf Squad. Although Allied Base number 18 cannot be saved, if this raiding team can be eliminated, the Allied forces' face can be saved to some extent. The Allied forces were very angry, but in contrast, the coalition forces were extremely happy. Ha ha ha, good job, good job. Tisk, tisk, I didn't expect that I actually let them succeed. It seems that I underestimated them before. This is the first base to be destroyed. Hee hee, the Allies are going crazy. My dear, this team is so powerful in combat. That magnetic blast infantry is the captain, right? How can electromagnetic attacks be used like this? I've learned a lot. The main battle is on the 15th, and some troops are auxiliary on the 16th. We have just arrived on the battlefield, and you just give us such a big surprise. Ha ha ha, this guy Lao Li, I said he can't be so impatient. It turns out he is so sure. Allied base number 18 is about to be destroyed, and the Allied forces are already impatient. Hee hee, I just want you to be impatient. Want to destroy this team to save face? Bah, I won't give you this chance. Pass the order, the Lightning team is gathering and preparing for support. The 3rd unit gathers and prepares to receive this team. Fire team gathers. Steel team assemble. The 1st unit gathers. The Allied forces were crazy and did not hesitate to dispatch a large number of troops to destroy the Wolf Squad, but the Allied forces were tit for tat. After checking the movements of the Allied forces, the commanders of the 5 coalition bases near here quickly mobilized the base guards. What did they say? We must keep the Wolf team. The battlefield was already in turmoil, but Wang Ling's battle just added fire to the battlefield, making both sides a lively place. After observing the movements of the enemy and ourselves on the electronic map, Wang Ling did not dare to be idle. He hurriedly urged the troops to seize the time to destroy the Allied base number 18. The main force of the Wolf Squad had long been impatient. After giving the order, they directly spread the formation in an arc to the entire Allied base, meeting the gods and killing the gods. All the Allied bases touched, whether they were the remaining troops, regardless of buildings, everything was quickly pushed aside. The Allied base that had just been built not long ago was not too large in scale. Under the crazy sweep of the Wolf team, it was quickly wiped out completely, not even the hyperdimensional mining vehicle was left behind. After winning the first battle, the Wolf team couldn't help but cheer for joy, but as the captain, Wang Ling had no time to be happy because the more intense battle had just begun. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 283. So far, the construction of the tank factory at the coalition base on the 15th and 16th has just begun. It is basically in the initial stage. But the foundation here hasn't been laid yet, but Wang Ling has already built an entire Allied base. Originally, the battlefield of the decisive battle was extremely stalemate, with each other starting a tug of war. However, Wang Ling broke this phenomenon and became a madman and a troublemaker on the battlefield. He hated the Allies, excited the Allies, and even both sides mobilized for it. Large-scale reinforcements and a brutal firefight are probably not far away. Although this Allied base number 18 also came from victory in other battlefields, it is still in the construction stage after all. Although there are many soldiers and elites in the army, the Wolf Squad does not have much power against them. Despite the pressure, Wang Ling didn't feel very happy about demolishing this base. After all, he had the confidence to do so. However, Wang Ling had to face the large-scale reinforcements from the Allies. Among the reinforcements, the fastest and the first to attack the Wolf Squad were the 20 fighter jets, which were at different distances from them. The 4 closest ones probably only had less than half an hour's flight time. During this period of time, Wang Ling would not be idle and quickly ordered the troops to retreat. All the mobilized soldiers entered the anti-aircraft tracked vehicles in an orderly manner, and began to retreat following the Apocalypse tanks and Rhino tanks. Although the speed of the tank was not slow, it was still far behind the fighter jets. After more than half an hour of chasing and retreating, the first 4 intruder fighter jets were approaching the Wolf squad. If they were ignored and kept retreating, then for the fighter jets, the Wolf squad would be a target without any resistance. This was certainly not what Wang Ling wanted to see. Therefore, under Wang Ling's order, the troops immediately stopped retreating and prepared to respond to the enemy. The remaining 20 or so anti-aircraft crawler vehicles were at the front, Apocalypse was slightly behind, and the Rhino tank had no prevention and control capabilities and stayed far away. After the arrangement was completed, Wang Ling got out of the car alone and transformed into a 1-star anti-aircraft infantry. At this time, Wang Ling was quite lucky. Fortunately, he had switched to the anti-aircraft infantry unit. Although the King of Soldiers level magnetic blast infantry is strong, it is beyond the reach of air power. To deal with the Allied air forces, specialized air defense forces are needed. Although the firepower of this star of anti-aircraft infantry is almost negligible in front of the entire army of anti-aircraft tracked vehicles, it is good to be able to contribute more than to sit back and wait for death. After all the soldiers were in place, the 4 invader fighter planes finally arrived at this place. Before they could drop their missiles, Wang Ling followed the army of anti-aircraft crawlers and opened fire. More than 20 anti-aircraft crawlers were able to deal with 4 intruder fighter jets, which was a matter of easy success. With just 2 rounds of shelling, all 4 intruder fighter jets were shot down, leaving little time to react. One of them was faster. When it was shot down, it also dropped a missile, which accurately hit an elite tracked vehicle. But one missile only reduced the anti-aircraft crawler vehicle to a low level of health. Give it some time to restore its full health. After shooting these 4 aircraft, Wang Ling couldn't help but click his tongue. It was indeed an army of anti-aircraft crawlers. He had tried his best to fire just now, but he didn't get any experience. However, there is no need to be too anxious, as there are still 16 fighter jets in the rear. These fighter jets were not too far apart from each other. The first wave was shot down and the second wave would come soon. Wang Ling simply stopped urging the troops to retreat and just waited here. While waiting, the second echelon of fighters finally arrived. These are 4 Black Hawk fighters, which are more powerful and have higher armor. They are much more resistant to beatings than the invader fighters. Hit me. But no matter how hard they resisted, they couldn't hold off more than 20 anti-aircraft crawler vehicles. At Wang Ling's order, all the crawler vehicles opened fire. The arrangement of these 4 Black Hawk fighter jets is somewhat interesting. 2 of them cleared the way and flew in front, while the other 2 followed obscenely behind. As a result, the first 2 Black Hawk fighter jets were shot down without any time to drop bombs. However, during this gap, the last 2 Black Hawk fighter jets had already passed through the area of the anti-aircraft crawler vehicle and quickly passed over the Apocalypse tank. 2 missiles were fired, hitting a Rhino tank accurately and destroying it in an instant. However, the consequences of doing so were also quite disastrous. After the missiles were dropped, the 2 Black Hawk fighter jets had no chance of returning alive. They were almost immediately caught by anti-aircraft crawlers and buried with the Rhino tanks. During this period, the Apocalypse tank naturally launched anti-aircraft missile attacks, but the speed of these missiles was too slow. The targets were blown up without even reaching the Black Hawk fighter, so they had no choice but to self-destruct in the air. This is also why Wang Ling doesn't want the Apocalypse tank to be used for air defense. It's really not as powerful as it is on the ground. The cost of building Black Hawk fighter jets is very high, and the value of each one is far higher than that of a Rhino tank. However, in this second wave of attacks, the Allies exchanged 4 Black Hawk fighter jets for one 1-star one. The Rhino tank is simply losing blood. However, Wang Ling was not happy with this comparison, and shouted anxiously, "Don't be so stupid, remember to dodge, avoid the missiles." All the tanks shook their barrels slightly, not sure if they were responding to orders or mocking him for standing and talking without pain in his back. Afterwards, the battle continued. The following 12 invader fighter jets were divided into 3 waves and attacked one after another. In the end, they only killed 1 anti-aircraft crawler vehicle and disabled 2 Apocalypse tanks, but they themselves were all annihilated by anti-aircraft crawler vehicles, and as many as came were destroyed. Even Wang Ling also gained experience during this period. It was not easy. In Red Alert, it is relatively easy for ordinary infantry units to advance before they reach the elite level. If a conscript destroys a tank, he can be directly promoted from no level to the elite level. And if the anti-aircraft infantry eliminates a fighter jet, naturally it also had this effect, and as a result, Wang Ling was naturally promoted to a 3-star elite air defense infantry. The firepower of this elite level is really different from that of the veteran level. To put it bluntly, a single veteran level anti-aircraft infantry is useless. However, after the 3-star elite, the firepower is not even worse than that of an ordinary anti-aircraft crawler vehicle. Now, Wang Ling finally had the ability to defend himself and counter-attack when facing the Allied air power alone. However, Wang Ling had no time to be happy. The Allies had spent a lot of money to eliminate the Wolf Squad. The fighter jet army was just a vanguard. The chasing troops behind were what really gave him a headache. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 284. After the fighter army, there are 2 types of Allied troops closest to the Wolf Squad. One category is rocket pilots, and there are about 50 of them. As an air assault force, although the rocket pilots were not as fast as fighter jets, they were not slow either. Naturally, they were far ahead of other encirclement and suppression forces. If these 50 rocket pilots advance together as a group and encounter the current Wolf Squad, even if the Wolf Squad has more than 20 anti-aircraft tracked vehicles, they will probably suffer some losses in the fight. However, these rocket pilots were in the same situation as the fighter jets. They set off from different Allied bases and were divided into 5 waves. There was no coordination with each other. If they rushed in one after another, they would be nothing more than moths rushing to the flame. Wang Ling was not too worried. The other category consists of hundreds of Allied infantry, plus more than a dozen tanks. This was a small-scale reinforcement force temporarily dispatched by the Wolf Squad after the nearby Allied base observed the Wolf Squad's movements before their surprise attack on Allied base number 18. In the past, the Allies had indeed underestimated the combat effectiveness of the Wolf Squad. The reinforcements were not large in scale, and they felt a little unhurried during the march. But now, the base they wanted to rescue was directly wiped out. The commander was furious and temporarily sent a large number of encirclement and suppression troops. Their small-scale reinforcement also accelerated their marching speed. Now they are still less than 50 meters away from the Wolf Squad. Not too far. However, even if they did arrive, Wang Ling didn't take it too seriously based on the number of teams. Of course, if there were only these 2 types of pursuers, Wang Ling could give it a go, wait where he was, annihilate them all, and then return safely. However, to put it bluntly, these are just appetizers. The large number of encirclement and suppression troops sent by the 5 major Allied bases will be the real trouble. For these 2 types of pursuers, Wang Ling didn't want to delay his retreat, but the problem now was that Wang Ling didn't dare to retreat directly to the base. The 5 major Allied bases seemed to be determined to eradicate the Wolf Squad. The number of encirclement and suppression deployments sent out was too many. If they just retreated to the base, it would be tantamount to attracting the wolves into the house. Base number 15 and number 16 is only in the construction stage now, and all facilities are not complete. Attracting such a group of Allied troops at this time will definitely be a disaster. No, this tale can't be brought back to the base. Wang Ling gritted his teeth and felt a little annoyed for a moment. The battle for hegemony has already begun on the decisive battlefield. Why are these bastards from the Allies still so arrogant? Isn't it just destroyed? An Allied base? This is called a mobilization of troops. Although Wang Ling is a player and has a good understanding of the Allied forces and the Allied forces' enemy and our own arms, he is still just a squad leader after all. It is difficult for him to understand the so-called face of the Allied forces. You've already broken up with each other, do you still want me to save face for you? While he was depressed, Wang Ling accidentally glanced at the coalition reinforcements on the electronic map. When he saw it, he suddenly saw a surprise. It seems that because the commanders of the dispatch base also took into account Wang Ling's concerns, the movement of the army did not move closer to Wang Ling's wolf squad, but instead rushed to the same place collectively. Looking along the map, Wang Ling discovered that the place where reinforcements from the 5 major bases wanted to gather was a 3-way intersection area under a mountain range. If the army is stationed on a mountain range, it is condescending and easy to defend but difficult to attack. This is a good place to block the battle. These reinforcements are so stupid, haha, it's like sleeping on the pillow, Wang Lingling said happily. All troops obey the order, change the retreat location, and move forward at full speed at the 3-way intersection. Allied Base Command Post number 15. Ha ha ha, well done, Zhao Pingwang laughed so happily after seeing the performance of the wolf team. Raoski was also amused. Wang Ling is really a lunatic. He always plays his cards against the rules, yet he still gets miraculous results. It's really strange. It's not necessarily a bad thing to not follow common sense and go eccentric. We couldn't imagine what earth-shattering things Wang Ling would do. The Allies were even more confused. For example, this time we sent troops, we all felt crazy. The Allies were even more unexpected, and the result was that a base was swallowed up like this, Major General Li Wiki also said with a smile, and he felt very comfortable when the results of the wolf team came out. Even though they haven't even stood firm here, their own troops have already made great achievements, which makes their entire base look bright. Old Li, hee, congratulations, this team leader named Wang Ling is really capable. Even Major General Luo congratulated General Li Wiki via radio. However, before General Li Wiki could respond, his tone suddenly changed. However, don't get too happy too early. The Allies seem to be anxious, and they have dispatched such a large number of encirclement and suppression troops. It seems that we are determined to destroy Wang Ling. Although our 2 families are still here, we are still in the early stages of construction and cannot withstand the encirclement and suppression of 5 major Allied bases. If Wang Ling lures them here. Major General Luo did not elaborate on the consequences of this, but no one knew what would happen. When Zhao Pingwang and Raoski heard this, they immediately took a breath of air, obviously shocked. Even Major General Li Wiki had a serious face. The current situation is quite serious. Just when the commanders of their 2 bases were having headaches, the radio suddenly connected to the frequency of other base command posts, and Zhao Wuji's voice came from it. Lao Li, Lao Luo, congratulations. He has achieved great military exploits, no wonder he was able to defeat the Allied forces so quickly despite being weak on the previous battlefield. With his combat effectiveness and decision-making, tisk, it's okay. Hee, it's not bad, but it's a pity that the Captain Wang Ling is not under our command, otherwise I would be very happy. There was obviously a sour taste in General Luo's words. But Major General Li Wiki gave a bitter smile. We have achieved success, but trouble has come. We cannot withstand the encirclement and suppression of the 5 major Allied bases now. If you can't handle it, there are us. We contacted you just for this matter, Zhao Wuji said. We old guys discussed it and we can't bring the Allied encirclement and suppression troops to your place, otherwise we will be counted as go to aid. You are also in danger, so we have sent all the reinforcements to the three-way intersection. It is a naturally dangerous area, easy to defend and difficult to attack. Quickly ask your troops to change their target and lead the Allied troops there. Okay. When Major General Luo Er and Major General Li Wiki heard this, their eyes lit up. They were indeed a team that could quickly deal with the enemy and rush to the battlefield for the decisive battle. Those commanders were thieves. After the communication was interrupted, Major General Li Wiki wanted to send a message to Wang Ling, but the radio was not connected yet. Zhao Pingwang suddenly said, "General, I'm afraid we won't need to contact you specifically. You see, the army of the Wolf Squad has already moved toward. We retreated towards the three-way intersection." Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 285. After King Xiaoping finished speaking, Major General Li Wiki and Rovitsky all looked at the electronic map. Sure enough, they found that the Wolf team had evenly distributed its soldiers to other spare air defense tracked vehicles, and commanded the army of tanks, changing the target. Heading towards the fork in the road. Yes, Major General Li Wiki was a little surprised. He is indeed a lunatic who can take the lead in destroying an Allied base. Wang Ling's vision is quite vicious. He uses his sword to achieve miraculous results. It seems to be no accident. Major Rovitsky asked, but how did he know that he was going to the three-way intersection? Could it be that the commanders of other bases contacted him in advance? Probably not. If the generals from other bases want to contact the troops at our base, they have to go through our frequency band. There is no way to contact them individually. Most likely Wang Ling has also foreseen the enemy troops coming to his home. How serious the consequences will be. I saw the reinforcements gathering towards the three-way intersection, so I made a temporary decision. Is it the old friend or Xiaoping who knows Wang Ling better? As soon as these words came out, Rovitsky was speechless. No matter how picky he was, he had to give Wang Ling a thumbs up. On the battlefield, Wang Ling's Wolf Squad was still intensifying their retreat. If it were based solely on the speed of the anti-aircraft crawler vehicle, the Wolf team would be able to reach the three-way intersection very quickly, but who knew that there were still many Rhino tanks and Apocalypse tanks in the team? Both types of tanks have strong firepower, but the corresponding speed is much slower than that of anti-aircraft tracked vehicles. Especially the Apocalypse tank, the body is too thick and the marching speed is greatly restricted. In addition, in Red Alert, seriously injured tanks will also slow down. There are actually 2 seriously injured Apocalypse tanks in the team. With the Allies chasing them, Wang Ling did not dare to leave them alone, so the overall marching speed of the army was taking care of these 2 Apocalypse tanks. Of course, no matter how slow the speed is, it is still much faster than infantry. At first, the reinforcements sent by the Allies were mostly infantry, and the distance between the two sides was getting wider and wider. However, those rocket pilots had quickly approached the Wolf Squad, and finally broke into the fire range of the anti-aircraft crawler vehicle not long after. Wang Ling didn't want to spoil this group of rocket pilots, so the army immediately stopped and allowed all the anti-aircraft crawlers to start counterattack. Even Wang Ling got out of the car and started shooting with the anti-aircraft gun barrel. There is no way. Other arms have strong frontal combat capabilities. When fighting against the Allies, Wang Ling is not worried about the experience issue of upgrading. However, the limitations of the anti-aircraft infantry are too great. Upgrading is relatively difficult. Of course, he must seize all it's a job to gain experience. However, if it was just a wave of rocket pilots, it would be more wolves than meat. With more than 20 anti-aircraft crawlers, Wang Ling could not gain much experience. But he was not discouraged. After getting on the tracked vehicle, the troops continued to retreat. In the following period, the remaining 4 waves of rocket pilots also arrived one after another. The Wolf Squad fought and retreated, and all the rocket pilots were annihilated one after another. Wang Ling also got out of the car several times to assist in the attack. Although he gained some experience, he was still far behind the 5-star special forces. The other conscripts were more comfortable and did not have to run away in person. They sat in the anti-aircraft crawler vehicles and did not move the whole time. There were even some conscripts who were still talking to each other while the anti-aircraft crawler vehicles and rocket pilots were exchanging fire. Just for fun, the conditions inside and outside the car are really different. After the rocket pilot was dumped, the Wolf Squad was temporarily safer. The remaining encirclement and suppression troops were not very fast and could not catch up with the Wolf Squad for a while. As a result, the tanks of the Wolf team took this opportunity to step up their march, and finally arrived at the 3-way intersection more than 3 hours later. After passing this intersection, the Wolf Squad army climbed up the mountain in 3 or 2 turns, and all the mobilized soldiers finally got off the tracked vehicles. At this time, the other 5 support army teams had also arrived and were stationed here. All the soldiers gave a military salute to the Wolf Squad, and even the 5 captains were still reporting their homes. Base 7, captain of the Lightning team, Lei Ming, this person lives up to his name, with a voice as loud as thunder, and a resolute look in his eyes. Looking at the epaulets, this captain has a higher rank than Wang Ling. He's a major now. Number 8 base, captain of the fire team, Xia Tian, this man has an ordinary appearance, but his fiery eyes can easily leave a deep impression on others. His military rank is the same as Wang Ling, and he is also a captain. Number 9 base, captain of the 3rd unit, Zhang Yang, this man is quite handsome, but when he speaks, there is always an inexplicable smile on the corner of his mouth, which makes him look very flamboyant. He is also a captain like Wang Ling. Military rank. Base 10, captain of the steel team, Long Gang, this man was different from Zhang Yang. He was very serious and expressionless when he spoke. But because of this, he looked very resolute and unyielding. His face seemed to have been cut with a knife. He is also handsome and good-looking, but his military rank is slightly lower, he is a captain. Base 11, captain of the 1st unit, Zaha, the last person is a foreigner with blue eyes, gray hair, and a hooked nose. He seems to be looking at Wang Ling with strong curiosity. His military rank is also a captain. The 5 major coalition bases dispatched 5 teams to support them. Their captains were basically senior lieutenants, and there was even a school officer. It was enough to see how much these base commanders valued the Wolf team. The Allied forces are determined to destroy the Wolf Squad, but the coalition forces are determined to save the Wolf Squad. When the 2 powers meet, it depends on who is tougher. The members of the Wolf Squad were flattered by the collective military salute of the 5 teams, but after all, they had seen big scenes and experienced many bloody battles in person. Their mental quality was not bad, and they quickly returned to normal and returned the salute solemnly. Wang Ling also followed suit and announced his home address, Base 15, captain of the Wolf team, Wang Ling. Thank you for your assistance. Lei Ming, as the highest-ranking military officer present, took the words naturally and said with a smile, "No need to thank you. In our own army, saying thank you is enough to gain recognition." Long Gang remained expressionless. "It's our duty to send troops. We carry out the commander's orders without any thanks. This guy is quite cold. Wolf Squad. No wonder they dared to send troops to beat up the Allies as soon as they arrived on the battlefield. It turns out they are adhering to the wolf spirit. Not bad, not bad." His eyes looked as if he was about to change his team's creed. Zaha held out his thumb and said with a smile, "We have been in a stalemate before, but you are lucky enough to destroy an Allied base as soon as you arrive. Ha ha, Wolf team, well done. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 286. It's just a fluke, it's not that exaggerated. Wang Ling didn't feel complacent and continued casually. Each of the four captains made an opening statement, but Zhang Yang, the captain of the third unit, did not speak. He just looked at Wang Ling, maintaining that inexplicable smile, as if he was scrutinizing it. Wang Ling noticed his gaze and asked curiously, "Captain Zhang, what's your advice? Why are you looking at me like that?" Zhang Yang didn't limit himself and smiled and said, "Captain Wang Ling, to be honest, I have some doubts about your performance this time." "Oh," Wang Ling raised his eyebrows, a little confused, "why do you say that?" Zhang Yang replied provocatively, "You just arrived on the battlefield and started to attack, but the Allied base you destroyed was also just built, and the base's defense facilities were sparse, so you picked it up. It's cheap, just caught off guard." Wang Ling was speechless for a moment. Why was this man speaking so mercilessly? How should I interface with this? At the moment of embarrassment, Xia Tian suddenly intervened, "TCH, can't you change your arrogant temperament? Your parents named you Zhang Yang, so you have to be arrogant? How about that Allied base number 18? Cheap, why didn't your third unit pick it up? Why do you think there are so many guards in the base? If your third unit goes to attack with 100 people and dozens of tanks, what will be the result? I'm afraid you want to be beaten." Good guy, this man speaks more straightforwardly and is a bit gangster, but he has an appetite for Wang Ling. Zhang Yang stared back, as if he wanted to refute, but Lei Ming suddenly spoke and reconciled, "Okay, how can you two argue when they meet? This is in front of several captains, isn't it embarrassing?" It seemed that the three of them were old acquaintances before. No wonder Xia Tian was so sharp in his arguments and was not afraid of offending others. With such a peacemaker, Zhang Yang could only shrug his shoulders and said nothing more, while Lei Ming explained in time, "Captain Wang, don't be offended. Captain Zhang has such a bad temper, but he is actually a good person." Wang Ling smiled and shook his head. He didn't take it seriously. Instead, he said, "As I said before, it was indeed a bit of a fluke to win this battle. Captain Zhang was not wrong. But those things are not important now. After this battle, the Allies seem to be a little impatient, and with so many encirclement and suppression troops coming after us, we are also powerless. Don't worry, Captain Wang, the Allies want to destroy you, but we won't let them do it." Yan Tian smiled confidently. Zaha rubbed his nose and said, "Next, let's look at us." Even Long Gang also spoke, "Come to encircle and suppress our coalition forces, then devour as many as they come, and no one will come back alive." He still spoke with some coldness, but his harsh words were quite encouraging. Wang Ling smiled, then, "Please." The intention of these 5 captains was to let Wang Ling and the Wolf Squad rest and watch the show while leaving it to them to deal with the Allied pursuers. However, although Wang Ling and the others retreated all the way, they basically used anti-aircraft crawlers instead. They were not too tired now, so they did not accept their wishes and followed them to arrange themselves on the edge of the mountains, waiting for the alliance. The army pursues the army and comes. After all, the map of the decisive battlefield was too big, and the pursuers would not be able to catch up. Wang Ling took this opportunity to generally observe the strength of the 5 teams. As expected of teams that have won battles before, these 5 teams are not weak in strength. Each team has at least 80 infantrymen, mixed with some anti-aircraft infantry and magnetic blast infantry. In individual teams, there are also radiation engineers, and there are also many elite soldiers. There are also a lot of tanks. Almost everyone has at least 7 Rhino tanks, 6 anti-aircraft tracked vehicles, 5 Apocalypse tanks, a large number of elites, and some veterans. In addition, the Lightning team also brought 5 magnetic energy tanks. The huge electromagnetic devices flashed with thunder from time to time in the dark night, which looked very gorgeous. This type of tank, as the name suggests, also uses electromagnetic currents to attack. It is very similar to the magnetic blast infantry. A pair of huge electromagnetic devices are placed on the vehicle body to carry powerful electromagnetic power. However, after all, it is a tank unit, and it is a tank exclusive to a certain force in the coalition. Its power is much stronger than ordinary magnetic blast infantry. Of course, the magnetic blast infantry here does not include that pervert Wang Ling. The 5 support troops, plus Wang Ling's Wolf Squad, totaling more than 500 soldiers and nearly 100 tanks, were lined up on the edge of the mountains and were waiting. With this scale and geographical advantages, the Allies wanted to break through. 1 word, difficult. 2 words, difficult. After seeing it, Wang Ling felt relieved and turned his head, keeping an eye on the electronic map while on guard. In this way, after waiting for nearly an hour, the first wave of pursuing troops finally arrived at the 3-way intersection area. This wave of chasing troops was not large in scale, with only a few hundred soldiers and a dozen tanks. It was the same group of Allied troops that had previously planned to assist Allied Base number 18. For this group of Allies, even if the Wolf team encounters it alone, they will not worry about anything at all, let alone the 6 troops now, which will not have the slightest pressure. After they approach, with a thunderous order, all the soldiers and tanks that could reach the enemy opened fire, and fire snakes flew down like a meteor shower, catching the chasing army off guard in an instant. A large number of soldiers fell down in rows, and the tanks fell down in rows. One after another they also exploded. This 3-way intersection area is indeed a good place to stop the battle. The large troops marched towards the mountains. From a commanding position, they had a very wide field of vision, and even the shooting range was much longer than on the flat ground. If the Allied forces want to counterattack, soldiers must brave artillery fire and get close to the edge of the mountain range to shoot at some of the coalition troops. Tanks also need to pass through this main intersection under a hail of bullets, go around to the back and climb up the mountain range before firing. But how could the coalition give them this opportunity? Massive bullets and artillery fire were raging, mixed with electromagnetic currents and radiation waves. Hundreds of Allied soldiers and more than a dozen tanks were all annihilated just as they approached. Only a few soldiers had time to fire back for a moment before dying. He barely managed to kill a few mobilization soldiers. During this process, Wang Ling was also very busy. He no longer had to face too much pressure. He simply maintained the posture of an elite anti-aircraft infantry, shouldering the barrel of the gun and firing continuously. The destructive power of the anti-aircraft infantry against tanks was almost non-existent, but its lethality against infantry was quite terrifying. As a result, in the first round of blocking battle, Wang Ling alone killed at least 8 Allied soldiers. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 287. Out of hundreds of Allied soldiers, only 8 people were killed. This ratio may sound unremarkable at first glance, but don't forget, there were more than 500 infantrymen and hundreds of tanks at the scene. To grab 8 heads under this kind of firepower is already impressive. Of course, compared with the subsequent encirclement and suppression troops sent by the Allies, these Allied troops just now are just an appetizer. If according to the trend just now, all 5 waves of Allied troops are blocked, Wang Ling's level of air defense infantry will even it is possible to be promoted to a 5-star Special Forces soldier. Of course, this is just Wang Ling's preliminary idea. The plan cannot keep up with the changes and the situation on the battlefield changes suddenly. No one can guarantee what will happen next. After winning the first battle, all the soldiers who participated in the battle showed a little smile on their faces and looked very confident. But the 5 captains were very indifferent. The strength of their troops was very different, and they also occupied a unique geographical advantage to wait for work. If they couldn't win completely, then they could simply quit the battlefield and go home to farm. Zhang Yang curled his lips and commented, "This army seems to be the reinforcements sent by the Allied forces before. Facing 6 of our troops, they still dare to charge forward. It's really brave." But Long Gang said mercilessly, "How brave is this? You have to be cannon fodder in a situation where you are bound to die. You are just a reckless man." What he said seems to be true. If they unite with other encirclement and suppression troops, they may still be able to achieve something. Even if it doesn't work, they can kill some more coalition soldiers. However, this team accelerated their march and took the lead. I rushed over, but ended up becoming cannon fodder. Of course, there is nothing to be proud of after getting rid of these cannon fodder. The 5 captains did not have any emotional fluctuations and were still waiting for the battle. Wang Ling smiled calmly, holding the barrel of the gun, looking forward to the next battle. Time passed quickly, and an hour or so passed in the blink of an eye. It was a bit cold at night in the red alert world. Staying motionless on the mountains would inevitably feel a bit chilly. Even Wang Ling couldn't help but rub his arms, let alone the other soldiers. Many people tightened their bodies, and some even trembled slightly, but no one left their posts without permission. After waiting for so long, the leading team of the Allied encirclement and suppression troops finally rushed over in a mighty manner. This Allied force has nearly 200 soldiers, including more than 10 SEALs. There are more than a dozen multifunctional infantry vehicles, as well as Grizzly tanks, Phantom tanks, Prism tanks, etc. In total, there are more than 30 vehicles, which is a huge scale. If Wang Ling's wolf team were to encounter them alone, even with a pervert like Wang Ling and a large number of elite apocalypse tanks, they would suffer a big loss. But now, the wolf squad is not fighting alone. The total number of soldiers and tanks is 2 or 3 times that of the opponent. It also occupies the mountains at the 3 intersections. It is full of momentum and has no fear. Fire! After bringing this group of allies closer, with the thunderous command, there was another fiery scene like a hail of bullets. All the infantry tanks opened fire like crazy. The dense bullets were like rain, and there were so many the tanks' shells were fired crazily, almost covering them in swaths. The sound of gunshots and cannons was heard all of a sudden, making people's eardrums hurt. The Allied forces suffered such a head-on attack, and there were immediately a huge number of casualties in the team. Large swaths of soldiers fell, and tanks burst one after another. Almost every step forward, a large number of comrades died. The scene was extremely tragic. However, they received a fatal order to attack the wolf squad even in the face of a hail of bullets. As a result, this Allied force crawled forward under fierce artillery fire, filling every step with a large number of lives, and finally after the number of soldiers in the team was reduced by 60%, they climbed to the mountains. As their commander gave a hysterical order, all the remaining Allied soldiers, together with the remaining SEALs, opened fire and counterattacked the mountains. Coalition forces on. The firepower of the Allied soldiers was no worse than that of the Allied forces. Even because of the existence of the SEALs, the Allied forces were even stronger when the pure infantry confronted them. As a result, the remaining Allied infantry resisted together, and so did the Allied infantry on the mountains. They were killed one after another, and in just an instant, more than 10 people died. Da-da-da. Da-da-da. Allied bastards, go to hell. The 2 SEALs who were promoted among the team went crazy, holding submachine guns and shooting at the top of the mountain with all their strength. All the conscripts who were targeted were killed tragically, without exception. Of the more than 10 conscripts who lost their lives, almost 70% of it was done by these two people. That's not all. The large force was blocked, and only 2 of them were left among all the seals. This also made them feel angry. Taking advantage of this opportunity, they just wanted to kill a few more conscripts. But Wang Ling was very sharp-sighted. After seeing these 2 big threats, he gave up on the heads that could be snatched away at any time and fired cannonballs at the 2 seals. Although the anti-aircraft infantry did no harm to the tanks, it would definitely give the infantry a headache. What's more, Wang Ling was already at the 3-star elite level. Under the continuous fire of artillery shells, the 2 seals had just completed the next round of strafing and had not had time to counter-attack Wang Ling. Ling Nei was bombarded to death. Before he died, he looked at the figure carrying the gun barrel on the top of the mountain. What was revealed in his eyes was strong resentment and despair. Without these 2 threats, the remaining Allied soldiers had no ability to resist and were quickly annihilated. The rest is the tank troops. Logically speaking, these tanks need to go through the entire 3-way intersection and go around the mountains to counterattack, which is easier to deal with than the Allied soldiers. However, even Wang Ling did not expect that the dozen or so multifunctional infantry vehicles that originally threatened the least could attack directly from the bottom of the mountain to the top of the mountain. Caught off guard, the coalition troops were bombarded by more than a dozen infantry vehicles. 4 soldiers died on the spot and 2 were seriously injured. Only then did Wang Ling regain his composure. Yes, the attack method of this multifunctional infantry vehicle is missile attack. It can defend against air and can also deal with ground targets. The key is that the missile track is very flexible and can turn and fly in weird arcs halfway. In this way, it can attack from the bottom of the mountain. It's not impossible to get to the mountain. As the saying goes, every encounter leads to wisdom. After being awakened, almost all the troops on the top of the mountain concentrated their firepower on those multifunctional infantry vehicles. Although this infantry vehicle has multiple functions and can even fight from the bottom of the mountain to the mountain, its armor and health are really poor. After being focused on the fire, more than 10 infantry vehicles were destroyed almost instantly. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 288. All the infantry were killed, and even the multifunctional infantry vehicles that could attack the top of the mountain were annihilated. The remaining tanks, whether they were Grizzly tanks, Phantom tanks, or Prism tanks, had no threat unless they could get through this section. At the 3-way intersection, rush up the mountain. However, with the coalition forces stationed here, how can they be given this opportunity? When the remaining tanks rushed forward, they increased their firepower output and blew them up before they could cross the 3-way intersection. At this point, the first round of offensive by the Allied encirclement and suppression troops was successfully annihilated. But facing this battle situation, none of the captains present were happy. The coalition forces were much larger in number than this group of Allied forces, and their geographical location was unique. As a result, the Allied forces fought back desperately and still annihilated more than 30 conscripts. If this was placed on flat ground and attacked head-on, the casualty ratio would probably be even greater. It is indeed an Allied force that has been able to maintain a stalemate with the Allied forces for such a long time. Their combat effectiveness is indeed commendable. In the situation just now, if our positions were reversed, we might not be as good as the Allied forces, right? Lei Ming sighed from the bottom of his heart. These words inevitably overshadowed others' ambitions and undermined his own prestige, but the captains at the scene surprisingly did not respond. Even Zhang Yang remained silent, apparently acquiescing. However, Wang Ling was an exception. When the scene was a bit dull, he smiled and said, "There is no need to belittle oneself so much. The Allies are indeed not weak, but we are also very strong. Otherwise, how could this battle for hegemony have reached such a stalemate?" Step. When the others heard this, they immediately raised their eyebrows. This is a good saying. After raising the interest of this group of people, Wang Ling continued to explain, to put it bluntly, the battle just now has nothing to do with combat effectiveness. It is just a matter of the conflict between the arms. Among the infantry army, the SEALs have the ability to kill infantry instantly. If these types of troops are mixed into the infantry group and let them get closer, our infantry will of course suffer heavy casualties. Next time, it will be better to concentrate firepower to eliminate them in advance. As for the multifunctional infantry vehicle, it also has a unique attack method and can attack from the bottom of the mountain to the top of the mountain. As long as this thing has not reached the elite level, it is easy to target. For example. Having said this, Wang Ling suddenly smiled confidently and commanded the troops skillfully. He slightly moved the infantry at the front back a certain distance. Instead, the Apocalypse tanks and Rhino tanks were at the front, blocking the infantry. To be honest, Wang Ling has long been accustomed to this arrangement. In almost every large-scale attack, tanks are used as shields. In his heart, soldiers are more valuable than tanks. This time, it was also because the coalition forces had too much advantage and Wang Ling also wanted to gain some experience, so he didn't make any arrangements in advance. He was used to it, but this was the first time for the other captains to come across his approach. In the past, tanks were more precious than infantry, and infantry were used as cannon fodder. But now, when they saw it, their eyes lit up, and they hurriedly followed suit. After all the troops were in place, Yan Ke praised, "You are indeed a madman who can take the lead in pushing an allied base. He is very capable of deploying it." "Haha, Lao Zhang, do you accept it?" Zhang Yang rolled his eyes and didn't bother to pay attention to him. After a few simple conversations, the team fell silent again. This was only the first round of the Allied offensive, and there were still 4 more rounds of offensive power behind them. Although they occupy a dangerous position, facing such crazy allies, they will inevitably feel some pressure. Fortunately, after the bloody battle just now, the soldiers in the team were no longer so cold, and they felt more comfortable while guarding. While they were waiting, only nearly half an hour passed this time. The second round of the Allied offensive had arrived at the 3-way intersection area, and the two sides quickly started fighting. The lineup of this second wave of Allied forces is similar to that of the first wave. The Allied forces had been deployed in advance by Wang Ling. This time, they were suppressing the Allied forces, condescendingly waiting for work, and specifically suppressing their threatening forces. After a bloody battle, all the Allied troops were wiped out, but only a dozen unlucky conscripts died in the battle. The second wave of resistance was a complete victory. After getting rid of the last light tank, even the captains couldn't help laughing this time. Long Gang was surprised. Simple arrangement and positioning, the effect is immediate, amazing. Wang Ling smiled and was just about to be humble, but when he accidentally glanced at the electronic map, he suddenly frowned. Something's wrong. What's wrong? Captain Wang, what's wrong? Several captains asked. Wang Ling said, "Look at the electronic map, the third wave of allies was getting closer and closer to us, but they seemed to have suddenly received an order and stopped." "Huh? Let me take a look." "It's true. What do they want to do? Is it possible that you are afraid of being beaten and don't dare to attack?" "Afraid of being beaten? How is that possible for those militants? You see, the third wave has stopped, but the fourth and fifth waves of Allied forces are still advancing. In my opinion, they are eating a Kaikanyazi knew that charging alone would not work, so he wanted to join forces and charge together." Several people discussed it word by word, and in the end Lei Ming's analysis was generally recognized. These Allied forces are not stupid. The Allied forces won the previous battle so easily. In addition to the favorable location, this group of Allied forces did not stick together and charged one by one. Of course, they were easily divided and annihilated. But if three waves of Allied forces unite and charge together, it won't be that easy to deal with. What are you afraid of? The soldiers will block it, and the water will cover it. Isn't it just the three Allied forces uniting? It's not like they haven't fought before. Just when the atmosphere between the teams was a little subtle, Wang Ling smiled and spoke. The other 5 captains glanced at each other, smiled awkwardly, and nodded heavily as if they were not serious about it. Next, there was naturally another wait. After nearly an hour, the 3 major Allied forces finally gathered together. However, these 3 major troops did not rush directly to the three-way intersection. Instead, they collectively changed their direction and ran to other places. Hey? What are you doing, not fighting? That shouldn't be the case. The Wolf Squad destroyed the first Allied base. With the Allied forces' competitive temperament, they can't just give up like that. Then what do these troops want to do? After all, the Allies are not toys. The other side does not play cards according to common sense, and the Allied forces are also a little confused. Just when several people were guessing the intentions of the Allied forces, Zaha suddenly exclaimed, "Detour! They are detouring. These Allied forces are smart and know that it is difficult to win at the three-way intersection. After the large forces are assembled, they will come around to our side and attack." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 289. Upon hearing what Zaha said, the other captains raised their eyebrows and hurriedly checked the electronic map carefully. After a while. It's true. These allies don't dare to rush through the three-way intersection. They have to take a long detour. From their position, if you spend more time to go around the Big Bay, you can happen to avoid the three-way intersection and go around to the side or even the back of us. In this way, our geographical advantage will be greatly weakened. These allies are not stupid. I thought they had received a death order and had to rush forward despite knowing that the situation was unfavorable. I didn't expect that there were some sober commanders. This will put a lot of pressure on us. The captains said something to each other, and after sighing, they all raised their hearts. Even though the coalition forces currently have 6 bases, they are mainly composed of small teams, adding up to about 500 people, plus nearly 100 tanks. But I don't know what the formation of the Allied troops was. There were more than 200 Allied soldiers and dozens of tanks in one wave. When the 3 groups came together, the overall strength instantly exceeded the 6 Allied forces. Force. In the past, relying on the favorable geographical location, the 6 major armies could fight head-on with the Allied forces, and might even overwhelm them to fight. However, the Allied forces did not always take advantage of them and temporarily changed the direction of attack. This advantage of the Allied forces disappeared immediately. Not see. Without this advantage, and facing the Allied forces whose overall strength is even stronger than theirs, you can imagine how tragic the next battle will be. No wonder the stalemate can continue like this. The coalition forces don't have a fuel-efficient light, Wang Ling smiled bitterly. At this distance, it was too late to ask for help again, so we had to go ahead. Before, Wang Ling was still thinking about using these blocking battles to improve the level of anti-aircraft infantry, but now that the situation was serious, he had no way to let go, so he decisively transformed into a king-level magnetic blast infantry with great combat effectiveness. The surge surged instantly, comparable to weapons of mass destruction. With the strength of the magnetic blast infantry, Wang Ling was fully confident of winning this blocking battle. After switching the arms, he stretched his neck and smiled confidently, "Everyone, the matter has come to this, we can only fight hard. However, hard work fighting also requires skills. I have a plan and I need your cooperation. Next, Wang Ling told several captains about his plan alone. After hearing this, their eyes all brightened up, and Xia Tian even burst into laughter. Captain Wang, you can be the first to make meritorious deeds on the battlefield. It's really not an accident, this plan is so damaging that it will definitely be enough for the Allies to drink. Next, of course, it's time to wait. Now that the Allied forces had changed direction, it didn't make much sense to continue guarding this three-way intersection. The large force simply evacuated the place and came to a nearby open field to wait. And while waiting, another 2 hours passed quietly. Speaking of which, a long time has indeed passed since Wang Ling attacked Allied base number 18. This long night has finally passed, and a soft halo gradually shines on the horizon. Dawn is coming. Got it? Under normal circumstances, dawn symbolizes hope and inner life, and its soft halo always makes people feel comfortable. But landing on this battlefield made all the soldiers present nervous, because soon, this most tragic blocking battle would completely break out. The members of the 6 major armies could be said to have been up all night, but due to the pressure of the blocking battle, no one in the audience felt sleepy. They had no choice but to cheer up. If they were confused during this large-scale blocking battle, they would probably lose their lives here. By then, you won't have to worry about bedtime at all. The Allied forces were always advancing in an orderly manner, and Wang Ling was always observing their movements on the electronic map. After dawn, the Allied forces finally pressed forward in force and arrived near the Allied forces, but they failed. Instead of attacking immediately, they stayed on the spot, not knowing what they were waiting for. Regarding this situation, the other captains did not suspect anything under pressure. They just thought that they were waiting for the final attack order, but Wang Ling felt a little strange. To say what was strange, he was really not sure. After observing the Allied forces suspiciously for a while, Wang Ling expanded the electronic map to look at the entire scene. And this time, I found something fishy. On the other side of the gathering point of the 6 coalition forces, about an hour's drive away, there were some blue light spots at some point. When I looked closer, it turned out that they are more than 20 Chrono Legion soldiers. These space-time warriors had obviously just experienced an ultra-long-distance teleportation, and were still in a stiff state after the space-time movement. There were even very strong traces of space-time fluctuations around them. Why did I stop? I'm waiting for this thing, Wang Ling finally understood after seeing it. In fact, Wang Ling had already seen this style of fighting when he fought against the Allies on the last battlefield. That was when we destroyed the first Allied base on the previous battlefield and blocked the Allied encirclement and suppression troops with the Dog Squad. The exchange of fire on the frontal battlefield was very fierce, but the Allies were still using the Chrono Legionnaires to stab them in the back. They engage in battle and use their unique movement methods to sneak attack on the coalition forces from behind. However, the frontal battlefield was so fierce that few people could notice what was going on behind them. In addition, the movement of the Chrono Legion soldiers was so difficult that Wang Ling was not discovered until his team had been sneak attacked for a period of time. But this time, the Allies are obviously going to repeat their old tricks. If it were someone else who had to deal with this scene, they might be unlucky if they were caught off guard. After all, the map is too big, and the proportion of these blue light dots is very small. It is indeed difficult to spot a sudden movement without carefully checking the electronic map. See also the expressions on the captains' faces clearly showed that they didn't notice. However, Wang Ling is definitely an exception. He has suffered huge losses in this area and is always on guard subconsciously. 10 anti-aircraft crawlers will guard the rear of the army. When you see the enemy, you must deal with it as soon as possible. After observing the enemy's situation and guessing the enemy's thoughts, Wang Ling immediately made arrangements for the anti-aircraft crawlers in the Wolf team. Responding to the order, 10 vehicles soon left the battle line and hid in a row behind the army. This approach made several other captains a little confused. "Captain Wang, what's wrong? The pressure on the frontal battlefield is not small. Why were these tracked vehicles suddenly withdrawn? Hold the back. Are there any enemies behind?" Faced with their questions, Wang Ling had no need to hide anything. The Allies are going to play dirty, and there may be a sneak attack from the Chrono Legion at any time. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 290. Sneak Attack. Chrono Legion Soldiers. After hearing what Wang Ling said, the faces of the captains changed slightly, and they hurriedly checked the electronic map. After a while, they finally found a place nearly an hour's drive away from here, where more than 20 Chrono Legionnaires were still frozen. Soldiers. Hiss, the Allies are quite cunning. Without making a sound, the Chrono Legion soldiers have already been dispatched. Isn't it? The pressure on the frontal battlefield is not small. When the fight comes, these Chrono Legion soldiers suddenly come over to attack us, and we will really suffer a big loss. Good guy, luckily Captain Wang found out, otherwise we would have been hit hard, and we would have suffered a lot. Several people talked to each other and were very dissatisfied with the Allied forces' cruel methods. Wang Ling sighed and said, "Strictly speaking, they didn't do anything wrong. After all, this is a battle for hegemony. In war, of course, all means are used. As long as they can win, who cares about the means?" Having said that, it was still difficult for the captains to extinguish the fire. If they were not too far away, it would be too late. Someone might want to send an anti-aircraft crawler vehicle to extinguish them while they are frozen. At this point, we can only leave the rear to the anti-aircraft tracked vehicles of the Wolf Squad. After all, the pressure on the frontal battlefield is indeed considerable, and it is difficult to allocate excess troops to take care of the rear. After being on alert again, after waiting for a while, the Chrono Space Legion soldiers in the electronic map finally regained their freedom of movement. At the same time, the Allied forces on the front also received the general attack order, and the large forces rushed together and began a frontal assault. As for those Chrono Legion soldiers, they seized this opportunity and began to move through time and space one after another. This group of Chrono Legion soldiers move very clumsily. The time they freeze after each move is directly proportional to the distance. If they move too far at once, they will freeze for too long, so they can simply move in a small area and short distances. The movement shortened the stiff time, and then continued to move forward through time and space. This method of movement is troublesome, but short distance raids are very easy to use. Even if you want to sap them, it is difficult to get close to them. But the 6 major armies don't have much energy to take care of them now. On the frontal battlefield, the Allied forces are already very close. Seeing the infantrymen acting as cannon fodder at the front rushing towards them and entering the firing range, Wang Ling's eyes narrowed and an extremely brilliant electromagnetic current was emitted, quickly covering nearly 50 Allied soldiers and making them fall rapidly. Blood. Although I had seen on the electronic map before, Wang Ling used this electromagnetic current to attack Allied base number 18, but the shock of seeing it with my own eyes was far greater than what I saw on the electronic map. Many of the soldiers present were a little surprised. This is really a fierce man. However, the war has broken out, and no one has time to talk now. When this group of people were surprised, nearly 50 Allied soldiers had been electrocuted from a distance, and Wang Ling soon began the second round of bombardment. This round even included 3 or 4 Grizzly tanks and multifunctional infantry vehicles. While Wang Ling was bombarding, the Allied forces were always advancing. This second round of bombardment was not over yet. The Allied forces finally reached the Allied forces, and a fierce fight began. This is a game world, but the war in this world is not a game. Including Wang Ling, if he dies, he is really dead. Under this kind of survival pressure, who dares not to fight desperately? When the troops from both sides came into contact, there was no thought of probing at all. They all burst out with the most powerful firepower in an instant. The artillery fire that gathered for a while was bright, even brighter than the dawn sky. When Wang Ling bombarded the enemy in a large area, he was very targeted, covering as many of the Allied SEALs as possible. However, after all, the enemy's base was too large, and Wang Ling could not eliminate them all, so some were inevitably missed. One of the SEALs seized this opportunity and rushed over despite the hail of bullets. He ignored the Apocalypse tank blocking the front. He briefly turned around and opened fire on the army of conscripts behind him. In an instant, 5 or 6 mobilization soldiers were shot and killed. But the SEAL didn't feel comfortable either. He was quickly targeted by a radiation engineer on the side, who carried a radiation reactor and fired dark green radiation at him. Before the radiation engineers were deployed, the radiation had limited damage to tanks, but they were the natural enemies of infantry. Even the SEALs could not withstand 2 rounds of radiation and were completely melted into a pool of green water. After getting rid of the SEALs, the radiation engineer immediately attacked the other Allied soldiers who broke in, and 4 of them were melted in a short period of time. However, the Allied forces' attack was too fierce. However, there were some tanks mixed in the team. One of the Phantom tanks also rushed in front of him. He fired without hesitation. The radiation engineers were eliminated on the spot and caught fire. He ran around and fell to the ground within a moment, completely losing his voice. After the radiation engineers were eliminated, it was difficult for the Phantom tank to be disguised in the battle situation, and it was immediately killed by numerous mobilization troops. Crazy, chaotic. The large armies of both sides were fighting fiercely. There were a large number of casualties at every moment. Tanks and vehicles exploded and bullets rained. In the quagmire of war, no one dared to guarantee absolute safety. Even Wang Ling was killed by a multi-purpose infantry vehicle. A missile was fired from a sneak attack and he was slightly injured. The battle on the front line began, and at the rear, the more than 20 Chrono Legion soldiers who were trying to make a secret move also seized the opportunity, moved one after another, and soon arrived at the rear of the coalition forces. However, this place was always guarded by the anti-aircraft crawlers deployed by Wang Ling. As soon as enemy troops were discovered, all the crawlers were dispatched and opened fire while the Super Space Legion soldiers were still in a stiff state. The Chrono Legion soldiers in this state had no ability to resist at all and could only stand there as targets. In just a few breaths, nearly half of the Chrono Legion soldiers were killed. But at this time, the remaining legionnaires had regained their freedom of movement and hurriedly counterattacked. Although these Chrono Legionnaires acted together, the battle situation changed too fast after all, and it was difficult for them to cooperate with each other tacitly. As a result, the remaining 10 legionnaires fired chronospace rays together, and many of them overlapped. Only the 4 anti-aircraft tracked vehicles. The Chrono Legion soldiers in the offensive state were unable to move or resist unless they gave up the attack target. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the remaining 6 anti-aircraft crawler vehicles stepped up their firepower output and killed them in a few breaths. But at this time, 2 of the 4 controlled anti-aircraft tracked vehicles had been completely wiped out. The few freed-up legionnaires hurriedly attacked another elite tracked vehicle and controlled it in the blink of an eye. But the remaining tracked vehicles had no scruples, and directly regarded these remaining legionnaires as targets. Before the next tracked vehicle was wiped out, all the time-traveling legionnaires had been wiped out. In November, first of all, I wish you good luck. Then I would like to say that the previously blocked chapter has been revised 5 or 6 times, and all applications for unblocking were rejected. It would be unreasonable to simplify it any further, so I don't want to bother with it anymore. Anyway, there are chapter reminders for the next chapter. However, I really don't know if that chapter is blocked. Will it deduct perfect attendance? I hope it won't be deducted. Otherwise, it will really be a waste. This month, my college roommate will get married. It will be a waste to make ends meet.